Let's build this from scratch. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new composition. This composition is 1000 by 1000 pixels wide. The time could actually be 4 seconds. My animation is a little less than 4 seconds. And I'll call this bouncing ball 2. So that's pretty good. Frame rate 23976, that's fine. And I'll click OK. First, let's just set up the background. So what we'll do is use our rectangle tool to create the sky. And so I'll choose my fill color as sort of a light blue. And one thing that I don't know if I taught yet, but if you want a square or a rectangle to fill your frame, all you have to do is double click the rectangle tool up here. And that creates a new shape layer and it fills the frame. Cool, right? And I'll rename this sky. So clicking on the shape layer, pressing return, and then calling it sky. Now let's go back to our rectangle, change the fill to gray. Whoops. Now actually that's a good lesson for you. If you have this sky layer selected and then I change the color, it's going to change the color of this layer. So I have to actually select off of that sky layer. Now choose fill, color, and change it to like a gray. Then I'll just create a rectangle for the bottom. And I'll rename this ground. So these are our two background layers, and I'm going to lock those so I don't move them, don't do anything to them. I'm going to wait to create the clouds, so now I just want to create the ball. So I'll take the ellipse tool, click fill to change the color. I like this bright red. Then to create a perfect sphere, shift, click, and drag. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily matter how big it is, but something like that looks pretty good. I want to make sure that the anchor point is in the center because I'm actually going to add a little bit of a stretch to this ball when it bounces. So choose the pan behind tool. It's kind of confusing because this looks like it's the anchor point for the layer, but it's actually the anchor point for the ellipse itself. So make sure that you don't have the ellipse selected, but the shape layer itself. Now you see the anchor point. Now I can click it, and then using the control button on your PC or command button on a Mac, just drag and it locks it to the center when you kind of drag it to the center. Now let me rename this ball. And one thing that will help me out is just to color this red. So change the color. So now I know that this layer is the red color. Awesome. So the first thing that I want to do is add some motion to this. So basically it's going to start up from above the frame, bounce down, hit the ground, and then bounce up a few times. So I'll show you the original one more time. So it starts out, drops 1 bounce, 2, 3, 4, and then kind of like a little tiny bounce at the end. So let's use our keyframes to create this animation. For position, bring up position with the keyboard shortcut P. Now let's move this up above the frame of our composition, holding shift so it locks it in the vertical or the horizontal axis so it doesn't move to the side. Now once it's above frame, just set a position keyframe. Now I want to start out doing this kind of orderly, so what I'll do is go to 12 frames and now drag it down, holding shift again until it reaches and it's just touching the cement. So if it goes a little bit over, it's fine because that kind of looks like it's, on top of the cement and not just like hitting it and your view is completely vertical with it. So that looks good. And then we'll go back up to 1 second and I'll just use this number right here to drag up the vertical position. Something like so. We can play around with the positioning later because if it goes too high, it looks a little unnatural depending on the speed. Now I'm going to go to 1.5 seconds, which is basically where this 12 frame mark is. And I want to move it exactly where this keyframe was, so I can just copy and paste this. So copy it, Command C on my Mac, Control C on your PC, and then Command V to paste. Now I'm going to go to 2 seconds and I'm going to move it up, but not as high as we went before. And the cool thing is that you can kind of see the keyframes. It's kind of hard for you to see, I know, but there's these little squares. Those are where the keyframes are that we set. So if we go here, that square is right there on that keyframe, and you can see it. So I know I don't want to go above there. go to 12 frames. I still have that keyframe copied, so I can press Command V and it pastes that keyframe. Now let's go to 3 seconds. Let's go up just a little bit, back to 12. And then we'll just do like a little bounce at the end. It doesn't have to be as long. Just up and go forward and paste again. Now let's play through this and you can tell me what you think is wrong with this. The motion is all wacky. The way that a bouncing ball bounces and the speed of it does not look like this. We can add motion blur, which will help a little bit. So check on motion blur for that layer and then also for the timeline itself. Still not great at all. Another thing we'll do is add easy ease. So select all of these, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. So that ramps the speed, but it doesn't ramp it the right way. If you think of a bouncing ball, what it should do is should go down really fast, hit the ground really fast, and then when it goes up to this point, that's when it slows down. It slows at the peak of the bounce, and then it goes down and it gains speed, and it's gaining speed until it hits the ground, and then it shoots back up. And so what we're going to do is at these keyframes where it's at the top, we're going to go into the graph editor. So click graph editor. If you don't see this and it doesn't look like this, make sure you're on the speed graph, not the value graph. And now with these keyframes, we can select them and take the handles and drag out. So for both handles of this keyframe, we're going to drag to the left and to the right. So that eases the motion and it kind of hangs there in the air, bounces down, and then go to that next keyframe. And let's drag out those handles. Go to the next one where it's up in the air. Drag out the handles. It doesn't have to be perfect. We can play around with the speed later. And then lastly, for this very last one, you got the little handles over there. So let's play through this. Okay, it's getting better, right? It's not perfect, but it's getting better. One thing that I don't like is that it comes down too slow. And so there's different things we can do. One thing we can do is shorten the distance between this keyframe and this one. So if I move this over here to the right, it speeds up. Another thing we can do is actually move the ball further away so that the distance that it has to go is further, meaning it will go faster. So let me zoom out and show you what I'll do. So if I change this to 12.5%, then I go on this first keyframe, and then I drag up, I can actually start the ball from way up here. Now if I show you, it goes a lot faster, right? So this looks good, but the motion when it bounces on the floor doesn't look so good. It still sort of ramps down. We don't want it to ramp down. We want it to spring back up automatically. So with the graph editor selected, go into your position. And now for these handles, for each of these keyframes where it's bouncing on the ground, drag them in so it's an even faster bounce. So I'll go to the next one. Drag it in like so. This one, drag it in. And then for the last one right here, we'll drag it in too. Okay, so now if we play through this one, nice. It's looking better. Okay, there's one more thing that's kind of unnatural, and that's the fact that between each bounce, it's the same amount of time. So it's 1 second from the time it goes down and bounces to the top, and then from this top to when it pops up again. And that's not natural because when a bouncing ball bounces, the amount of time it takes for each bounce gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And you can see this if you bounce a ball outside. So what we want to do is make these keyframes for each bounce shorter. So for this first one, I think it's fine. But for this second one, we should make it a little shorter. So let's take all of these keyframes, drag them in a little bit. Take all of them, drag them in. Now we could keep doing that for all the keyframes, but let me show you a quicker way to do that. That's a little bit better. So I'll undo. What we can do is I select all of these keyframes, not the first two. Then I click the last one, holding Option down on a Mac or Alt if you're on a PC. Click the last one and drag in. And now that squeezes all of these keyframes together and it keeps them uniform. So those last ones, even though these ones are a little bit closer together, it's still squeezing them together at the same sort of rate as these ones are being squeezed together. So that looks good. A little bit faster for this bounce. Now let's select these ones, not the first four now, and again, holding Option down, we'll click the last one and squeeze it in. And now let's just see what this looks like. Okay, this last bounce right here is definitely a little too long. So let's actually just take these in, drag them in quite a bit. Probably this last one too, just drag these in. So it's a combination of using that Alt click and just moving things around. That's how I use After Effects anyways. Okay, maybe it's a little bit too short for this last one, so we'll just extend it. It's sort of a dramatic bouncing ball effect. Cool. So this looks pretty cool. I think the motion is very close. You can go in and tweak it and keep playing with it, but I want to move on to another technique that I did, which was actually adding a little bit of a squeeze to the ball. You can see here when it reaches the ground, it kind of squeezes and then it bounces back up, and that's to show the impact of it hitting the ground. Okay? So we'll use a scale animation. So bring up the S or scale keyframe, and we'll want to go to when it hits the ground right there. How do we know that's when it hits the ground? If we actually bring up P, we should actually put our timeline indicator there first, and then scale. So let's first just set a keyframe. So now if we press U, we can bring up both keyframes or all the keyframes set for this. And we're going to start out at 100%. So we can move this keyframe over to the left, but here we want it to be squeezed. So let's unlock the constrain proportions lock. So now we can change the width or the height individually. And then let's just squeeze the height to something like 70. What this does though is it also moves the ball up, or it doesn't look like it's hitting the ground. So we'll just, actually with this selected, we can just hit the down arrow keys or shift down to move it even further, one click at a time or one button press at a time. Make sure you're on the keyframe where this position is though. So now let's go to this next one, and up here it should be at 100%. So let's just copy this first keyframe, paste it. Now let's go to this next one, and you'll see that there's sort of an error. I can't move my time indicator right on this keyframe. And that's because when we use this little trick where we selected multiple keyframes and we did the Option or the Alt squeezing of these keyframes, sometimes it moves the keyframes off of the exact frame of our composition. I know that's a little confusing, but what we can do is just take this keyframe and just move it to the side slightly. Now let's squeeze it. I'm going to squeeze it a little less. Last time it was at 70. This time I'm going to be at 80. Again, I'm going to move it down though, so it's hitting the ground. At this keyframe, let's make sure that we have our scale selected and then paste it so it's at 100%. Again, here we can't get to this keyframe exactly, so I'm just going to go close to it, move this keyframe to the side, and now I'm going to set our scale squeeze to 90%, and then just make it go down just a little bit. Another way you can quickly go from keyframe to keyframe is the J and K buttons on your keyboard. If I press K, it goes to the next keyframe. If I press J, it goes to the previous keyframe. So I can just scan through these, and now here I can, with my selection tool selected, I can set it at 100%. So make sure I have it selected, and then press Command Paste because I still have that selected. K to go to the next keyframe. This one will just set to 95%. Move it down slightly. K again to go here. And select the layer and press paste. And now I'm just going to leave it at 100% because for that last bounce, there's not as much pressure and it's not going to really bounce that much. Let's easy ease these bouncing, or the scale. So let's select all of them. F9 on your keyboard. Now, one thing that looks a little funny is that it starts to squeeze before it even hits the ground, which doesn't make sense. Why would a ball squeeze while it's in midair? So we are going to have to go into our graph editor for scale. So select scale keyframes, click the graph editor, and now we're actually going to go to the value graph. This is how we adjust the value. So you can see that here on this first keyframe, the height of this ball is 100%. Here at this keyframe, it's down to 70. So we don't want it to be at 70 at this point. So I'm going to take this handle and drag it up kind of like so. So it actually doesn't really squeeze until it hits the bottom. And then it bounces up, reaches full peak size. And then again, for this one, I'm going to select that keyframe, drag this handle up. So you can see that we're actually staying at 100% until right about there where it bounces on the ground. And then lastly, for this keyframe, same thing, select that keyframe point, drag the value up for the beforehand of this animation. Awesome. I really like how this is coming out. I think it's even better than the original one that I made. Now let's add just that last detail of the clouds. So take your rectangle tool, make sure you don't have anything selected on your timeline. Let's change the fill to white. And actually it's the ellipse tool, sorry, not the rectangle tool. Now let's just click and create one circle. Remember how I talked about shape layers? You're actually creating individual shapes within this one layer. So if I just keep creating circles, I can create sort of a cool cloud, and it's all within this one shape layer that we can animate, but it has all of these different ellipses. So if I close that down and let's rename this cloud 1, and I'll drag this down beneath this ground, or at least beneath the ball, so that the ball goes in front of it. And now let's add a little bit of motion. Press P to bring up the position, set a keyframe wherever you want, and now I'm going to drag that keyframe to the very beginning of this composition. Now I'm just going to drag to the left just a tiny bit. Subtlety is really good with animations. And now I'm going to move this keyframe all the way to the right. See how I did that? Sometimes instead of moving my timeline indicator all the way to the end or to the beginning to set my keyframes, I just set it and then I move the keyframe where I want it to go. So that cloud is moving, it's moving actually relatively quickly. Let's create another cloud. So with the ellipse tool, with no layers selected down here, I can just, again, click here. And I'll make one for this one a little bit smaller so it looks like it's more in the distance. And in fact, when you have a cloud or something moving in the distance, it appears as if it's moving slower. So I want to make sure that the position animation is slower than the cloud one is. And by slower, I just mean it moves less. So at the beginning, press P to bring up position, set a keyframe. Now let's go forward in time. Now let's just move it. I'm just going to move it to the right a little bit. It creates a little bit more of a dynamic effect where the clouds are kind of parting. I thought that was cool. And so now that last cloud in the behind, it looks like it's further behind. Really, it's not a 3D space in this After Effects composition, even though we can do 3D work in After Effects, and we'll go over that later in this course. But here we have this cloud moving in the background, cloud moving a little bit faster in the foreground, and our bouncing ball. Awesome. What do you guys think? Were you able to get something relatively close to this? I know there were a lot of sort of more intricacies that I went through with the graph editor and the scale and the squeezing, but I hope that you were able to follow this project. Maybe this isn't something that you're going to use in a real world situation for your own brand or company or one of your videos, but knowing these techniques and knowing how to be intricate with it, have those little subtle motions, have the little subtle sort of squeezing of the ball after it bounces, making sure that the timing is good, making sure that you have that motion blur is all good. We can turn on motion blur for the clouds as well, but since the clouds are moving so slowly, you're not going to get much motion blur. If they were moving faster, you would. Awesome. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and this section of the course. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you in another one.